And welcome to a video lecture on the Opium Wars. Hopefully, by this point, you understand that taking guided notes really helps you remember the information that you hear about on this video lecture. So please get those out and fill them in as you follow along. Middle Kingdom mentality. Before the arrival of the Europeans, China was a relatively isolated country. Geographically, as we all know by now, China is surrounded by natural barriers, including mountains, deserts, rivers, an ocean, etc. Because of this isolation, it led the Chinese to believe that they were the Middle Kingdom. In other words, they were the center of the world and the universe. This idea was further ingrained in the Chinese psyche, or their mindset, as their civilization became more developed over time. The longer time went on, the more the Chinese felt like they really were the end-all, be-all in terms of societies and cultures. During the Han Dynasty, the Chinese started to venture outside of their borders to exchange goods and ideas along the Silk Road. The Chinese had mastered the art of making silk, and it was very valuable. So besides that, they could also sell their porcelain and their tea. So that's when they started doing it, was during the Han Dynasty. So even with time, the desire for Chinese products did not weaken. In the 17th century, Chinese tea was introduced to England, and it was extremely popular. By 1785, Britain was importing 15 million pounds of tea per year from China. That's a lot of tea. And although China did buy some items from the British, they were ambivalent, or they were on the fence about most English trading goods. They really weren't valuable to them. They didn't see, why they needed them. And so it was really the British buying from the Chinese, not vice versa. So between 1710 and 1759, the imbalance of trade was staggering between China and Great Britain. And it drained Britain of all of their silver, or much of it. During this period, Britain paid out 26 million pounds in silver to China, but only sold 9 million pounds worth of goods. This was a huge, huge trade imbalance. So what a trade imbalance is when you buy more than you sell. So as you can see, the Chinese were making all the money in the deal, and the British were losing out because they bought so much tea but didn't sell as much other products as the Chinese did. So they came up with a plan. Chinese tea was no longer a luxury in Great Britain. This mild stimulant was a necessity in industrial England. People needed it. They drank tea constantly. So they expected it. So in order to quit losing money in this deal, to rectify this trade imbalance, the English decided to secretly introduce opium, a highly addictive drug, into the Chinese market around the year 1800. They started smuggling opium into China to try and throw this trade imbalance off. Opium, which is a highly addictive drug, was the only commodity that the British felt would raise enough silver for them to continue buying tea from the Chinese. Because opium is so addictive, people became reliant on it very quickly. You can see this picture of some Chinese men smoking opium out of pipes probably in an opium den, and reading the newspaper. So as addicted to to tea as the British were, the the Chinese were to opium. However, opium is far more damaging than tea. As you can see, there's a picture of an opium addict on the slide. Very thin, very unwell, and very, very hooked on opium. So the British East India Company was behind smuggling opium into China for 40 years. 40 years without the Chinese government interfering. Again, the Chinese government felt that the way they ran their country was superior to all other countries, and they believed there was no need for them to reform the way they did things, despite the fact that the world was changing radically, and this dangerous narcotic in the form of opium was flooding into their kingdom and really damaging their economy, their people, the way that people live their lives because they were so hooked on this drug. In 1838, the Emperor of China realized that opium, this narcotic, was putting his country into peril, into great danger. An opium addiction was tearing at the fabric of the Confucian family and society, which really relied on respect and honor to hold it up, and was really the prevalent and main philosophy in China at the time. So it ran completely counter to what Confucianist values were, which was respecting your elders, respecting your family members, and not casting any shame or disrespect onto your family name. The trade imbalance had now tipped back in Britain's favor, and silver was leaving the hands of the Chinese to buy opium. It was not only being smuggled, it was actually being freely bought by the Chinese people. So the emperor, to address this problem, appointed Lin Seizu as imperial commissioner. Commissioner Lin was to investigate and officially exterminate the opium trade, just to get rid of it completely and solve the problem of opium addiction in China. He really wanted to do what was best for China and the Chinese people. That being said, he still believed that his country was superior to all others, which would become a problem, unfortunately, for the Chinese, because they really underestimated the power of other countries. There's Lin Seizu. So Commissioner Lin believed that if necessary, the Chinese army, who really were ill-equipped to battle the British, could actually defeat them if the situation presented itself. Commissioner Lin had no idea how powerful the British Navy was. They had been fighting wars for a long, long time, and they knew how to be effective. And Commissioner Lin did not understand that. So this is a picture of opium extermination on the beach in China. I'm just going to read this to you. Commissioner Lin demanded that the Cantonese merchants give up all of their opium. After several threats were carried out by the commissioner, Captain Charles Elliot, he was British Superintendent of Trade, ordered the opium traders to surrender their chests of opium. The superintendent sweetened the confiscation, meaning he made it less painful, by giving word that the British government would compensate these British merchants who were selling the opium for their losses, a promise that he was not authorized to make. However, it allowed British merchants to safely leave Canton, the Cantonese province, and return back to England. So now the opium situation in China was being dealt with by getting rid of it and destroying it and having these British merchants leave the country. Safely back on their own soil, the British merchants became indignant. That means they were furious. They were really mad. And they wanted restitution for their loss, whatever the cost, meaning they wanted to be paid back for all the opium that had been taken from them and destroyed that they were never paid for. They would rather fight for a bad reason than bow before the attempted intimidation of a people for whom they had come to have nothing but an amused contempt. So just like the Chinese thought they were superior to the British thought they were superior to everyone as well, including the Chinese. And that's why they got away with this for so long to begin with. They figured they were smarter and better and more developed as a society and a culture than the Chinese were. And that's how they could addict the whole country to opium, this horrible drug, and get their money back for their tea. The question of immorality on the English part was now a moot point. That means it didn't even matter. We knew it's immoral, they just did it anyway. Yes, they had introduced this highly addictive substance to the Chinese, and they encouraged addiction for profit. They were making money off of the Chinese people's addiction to this really terrible drug. But that said, the Chinese were messing with this very profitable British industry, and that was a problem. They didn't like that. They didn't like this country that they thought was less than they were, had attempted to stop this trade, which was very profitable for them. So as pressure increased on Lord Palmerston, he was the British Foreign Secretary, for restitution, meaning that the British merchants wanted their money back, he knew he had to come up with a plan to repay them. Okay? And he also knew that asking British taxpayers to pay a bill for some 2 million pounds of lost drugs that had been destroyed by the Chinese would be impossible. He felt that the easiest way to get the money back for this loss in income of opium sales was to pressure the Chinese into paying it back. And the way they would do this was through war. So with that, the English formally declared war on China and started the first of one of two Opium Wars in the country. Hopefully you were able to take guided notes and that helped you understand this lecture a little bit better. Thank you for listening.